I think these artists who feel that this is a problematic state of affairs would question the notion of evidence, would interrogate how we make sense of what's actually in the world, and try to reconstitute that set of relationships. Others are simply trying to draw upon science to make it more available to people, make it more accessible. Some would use the phrase democratizing technology, which is a term that's also been used quite heavily in the context of new media and computer technology. This concept appeals to the notion that, in fact, through opening up the protocols, the platforms, the source code, whatever it might be, the patents, we can do a lot more. We can achieve a lot more by doing this. And you see this happening a lot within computer technology. It doesn't happen so much in science and medicine. And I think, again, it's partly about how can we think differently about the development of science and medicine in a way that builds from what's happening in computer design. And this is beginning to happen. If you look at publicly funded research, there's more of an obligation on scientists to ensure that their work reaches as wide an audience as possible, often being open access public publications, but still there's this divide that exists. But the artists that we've worked with, the artists that we have been involved with around this year, have been trying to create new ways of looking at the world. And I think by thinking about art as a mechanism for innovation, particularly within intellectual thought and making sense of ideas, achieves this quite high aspiration. This is an example that I think is particularly interesting. This is by Revital Cohen, an artist, designer working in London, and this is called the Telepresence Frame. And as you can more or less tell, I think from the look of this, it is a heart monitoring device located within a digital photo frame. And so I would want you to look at this and think, well, what is this trying to do? What does this say to us? What does it tell us about ourselves? And I think we can make a number of interpretations of it. First of all, what's interesting about it is the transformation of a clinical device, a heart monitor, into a cultural artifact, a photo frame. So you have there this interface between health and culture. And what she's trying to get at through the design of this concept is, again, a question about how healthcare takes place. Why should it take place in what are often quite not just sterile environments, but not clinically sterile, but sterile emotionally as well? How can we make healthcare a more engaging experience? We're, again, in an era of increasing surveillance of our health through governments, through a range of organizations. So how would we regard something like this? Would this be a more desirable way of monitoring our health? Would we find ourselves more willing to participate in something like this? Does it scream of too much health surveillance, which is, again, one of those emerging narratives that we are unfortunately burdened by incredible imperatives that try to guide our behaviour and guide our lifestyles, whether it's drinking or smoking? Is this another one of those examples? But on the other hand, does it do anything very different from just looking in the mirror every morning and making some assessment of how we are? How is this different? What it's doing is revealing a different part of our identity, a different part of our bodies that we tend not to engage with on a daily basis. So that visualization is part of the process of opening up questions that we can think about. I'll turn the sound on. This is another example of an artist who is performing his body through trying to convey medical scientific principles, but at the same time inviting us to consider what we think of as our bodies. So this is Jan Marasic in his Blue Remix, a performance that he's done a number of times now, but which took place in FACT last year. And this is a man that's located within a box. He's ingested a range of a blue dye, and he spends around 40 minutes to an hour in this box excreting or perspiring this substance. So eventually, you can see the process here. He eventually turns blue at the end of it. He sweats. He's in a clear perspex box, so it's very hot in there. He sweats. He cries. Saliva comes out of his mouth, and you become very aware of how we are embodied beings. Again, this is about trying to re-engage with parts of our body that we tend not to notice, perhaps, on a daily basis. So going back to, again, this idea of computing and biology being related, the book, Human Futures, tried to gather all this together. This is a screenshot of the index for the book, which we put together in the form of a tag cloud, which gives you some sense of the range of issues that were considered within it. And part of what I tried to do in editing this was to bring new sets of relationships together, which tend not to have that kind of commonality. So one example of this is in debates about immortality and about life extension. So there was one work that we portrayed within the book and that we talked about, and this is by eToy Corporation, a project called Mission Eternity. And what you're seeing here is a sarcophagus. They were interested in thinking about how we remember people in a digital age, in an era where children born today will have so much recorded about their lives that we have a very interesting opportunity to try to depict this after they've gone. So within this sarcophagus, as they call it, what you're seeing is a low-power, LED-powered digital environment that reflects parts of that person's lives. So you're seeing stories from the past within this space. It's a memorial to that individual. And so we might think about what sorts of ways could we remember people after they've gone. How does that process of remembrance change in a world of pervasive recording? Is it something that a child that's born today, whose parents will photograph everything, record everything, they will have a different process of remembering their backgrounds than people born 20, even 30 years ago. So this is another example of an artwork that tries to imagine ways in which we might treat something like death in the future. It ties in with current debates about the possibility of life extension. So whilst this might be seen as the computing side of this particular artifact, a parallel conversation is taking place about the prospect of life extension, the possibility that in fact we are getting older as a population, and that's partly to do with the fact that we can attend to age-related diseases much more effectively. There are people working within the research of aging that talk about it as a disease, something that we ought to cure. And this is something that people are taking very seriously and funding quite significantly. A lot of the work within age-related disease is effectively extending our health span, which will indirectly extend our lifespan. So how should we think about these things? How should we think about humanity in a world where we consider death to be not something that we need to accept, but something that can actually be challenged and slowed down, brought to a halt, potentially? So these artists, these works over the last couple of years have been quite significant in my own thoughts about how we should regard the ethics of something like human enhancement. So a lot of my work has been located within the realm of human enhancement. This is a concept that has become quite popular over the last maybe 5 to 10 years, and has been principally about, again, the emerging technologies that are promising. Well, actually not promising, because they're already delivering predicaments for us to consider. So if you have a child anytime soon, or if you've had a child, if you're pregnant, you will be forced with the consideration about whether you save the stem cells of your child's umbilical cord. This is a very real moral choice that someone can face today. You'll pay around £2,000 to do it. It's not available on a national health service. But if you do it, you can safeguard your child from a range of blood-related disorders. This is a very difficult choice someone would have to make. £2,000 to potentially save the child's life in the first 11 years, or £2,000 for a television, which, this is in some way the sort of choice that people may have to make. But the era that is